Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to a map analysis video. Here we are looking at Engage by Catfood. Cool guy, he's responsible for some other maps. I can't remember them off the top of my head because I don't take notes, so check the description for his other work. But right now, focus on this, because what I got for you is a pretty reasonable map, I would say. It's got all of the things that you really want a map to have. Just looking at it from the outside, from like a marketing perspective, you've got a lot of flashiness, a lot of very unique imagery that gives the map its own kind of feel. And this is precisely what you're looking for if you just happen to be rolling through the workshop, as I often do, looking for 5v5 maps or something to that effect, where you can play some bot games, some team games, some like community pickup games or whatever. And of course, as of the recording of this video, you can actually play this in the Faceit map core thing, their map core hub. So you can check that out if you actually want to get into the nitty gritty with this map yourself. If this video serves as a kind of an advertisement for that sort of thing, you can actually play it with real people instead of bot Scott. I mean, who the fuck would play with that guy? So we have to ask the question, does it hold up to further scrutiny? What does this map offer us outside of the veneer, the sheer amount of visual quality that we're seeing here in terms of like its own kind of aesthetic? So we are standing in T-spawn, which is quite an open area. And in fact, I think if I had to levy any sort of immediate doubt, I won't necessarily call it criticism, but sort of extrapolating this out to comparisons to other maps. Whenever you have like a big spawns like this, you usually at least have a decent amount of cover. Whereas if I were ever to try to use this as a rotation, which sometimes could happen, given the fact that it's so far away from all of the other points of interest on the map, and also the fact that it's so bereft of any cover, this might actually be more difficult to clear than something like Inferno CT side, where you have to clear all those angles, because at least there are angles to clear, whereas in this case, the guy could be pretty much anywhere. So I'm not sure that that's really a bad thing. Like I said, it's just a little bit of doubt. I'm not sure how it would work out. I functionally do not know, but it's something that I think should be observed initially. And we're going to take a look at the path to the A bomb site. This is going to be a nice challenge for my memory, because even though I've played this map a lot, there are a lot of pathways, so I may end up forgetting something along the way. Let's hope not. Let's hope I don't have amnesia. The first thing that I should note that is probably pretty minor to some people, but you can't shoot these. Like, come on, man. You guys remember Ruby? You guys remember, or no, it wasn't Ruby. It was Studio. Studio had a map, or it was a map where you could play around with like different windows and breaking and stuff like that. And then there were some other maps that all were featured somewhat recently in the last year or so. And you could pop these windows. And this is more than just an aesthetic thing, because I can pop this window and then throw a deep Molotov to catch any CTs that are boosted up in that back A area. I might be able to throw that from afar, or a frag grenade, or a smoke grenade, or anything like that. There's so many different things that you might be able to do with a little bit more support for popping these, especially these roof ones, but also these side ones. I'm not sure if that was a deliberate sort of intention of the developers here, where the mapper actually wanted this sort of thing to be pop proof so that there was less of an emphasis on utility. I don't know. Obviously, I can't speak to reading anybody's mind, but I would say that just based on the fact that it's very difficult to wallbang most surfaces in this particular map, it's also very difficult to find any windows that are breakable. Like the sheer number of things in this case make me think that it's very likely that we are in a situation where it was a deliberate design decision. So bearing that in mind, it's one thing that I personally would disagree with. I think that there's also just something on a very visceral level that's kind of satisfactory when you throw a frag grenade or some other, like you just start shooting or whatever, at a room full of windows. Like imagine if I toss this frag and, you know, it pops over here, but every window in that whole area just comes crashing down. I mean, there's something satisfying in a visceral sense about that. But enough about my personal preferences when it comes to grenades and explosions and Michael Bay. We're going to talk about this particular area because it is obviously a rather pivotal area, or maybe it's not so obvious, but I'll talk to you about why. This drop-down area allows you to come back up at the cost of all of the platforming that you have to do over here. So if you do end up dropping or entering through the lower passageway, which will take you to the gate, this map's version of mid, I would say that generally speaking, it's something to consider. I mean, obviously, I guess you can jump over here. And one of the nice touches is that there is actually a little bit of clipping that you can step on this side of the railing, Not every map that has railings does it like that. Whereas in this particular case, I think it's very, very nice that that's the case. So, and generally speaking, I would say one thing that I'm a big fan of when it comes to anything that has a lot of height verticality differences, but in a more open environment than we've seen before in maps like Nuke or Vertigo, is that you end up getting a lot of angles that you can take, and you end up potentially running the risk of having too many, of course. But if you can play it off right, if you can have these open areas like what we're seeing here, if you can have gunfights taking place at that A rotate, which does require a boost, so it wouldn't be super common for CTs to be in that position necessarily. But if you can do something like that, right? If you can standardize this approach, it leads to a very different kind of gunplay than you might see in other maps. It doesn't seem like it should. I didn't even have to question up there, by the way. That's pretty smooth, I would say. Pretty expertly placed. Very precise. It doesn't seem like just aiming down or up, depending on your position, should significantly alter the gunplay. But in Counter-Strike, with how fast people can move and how low the time to kill is, those snap decisions matter, and it definitely warps the engagement in a way that I think has become this map's calling card. One of the things that you would say about this map if you were to summarize it in just a few words. This is a map that has a lot of verticality, but in a way that is different than other maps that have offered that before. This map incorporates its verticality into the gunplay and the gunfights that you're going to take. And that's something that we're going to just be observing as time goes on. We're going to continue the rotation to A. I like all of the decals and stuff that are over here. It helps you break up the monotony a little bit, and even the fact, like, it's a small detail, but these little trims that are placed over here are in a different pattern in this hallway than they are over here, even though the textures are probably identical. The fact that they're broken up a little bit differently helps you keep a better understanding of where exactly you are at any given time. It's like a subconscious thing, but I think it assists in allowing players to immediately process where they are. You'll notice that there's these movement things over here, but you also notice that there's no game audio for them. I think that's probably a readability concern if there were to be game audio, but I think it would potentially be okay in given circumstances. Maybe if the events were a little bit more like scattershot in that they weren't super frequent, like these, it's happening a lot, so visual movement is certainly there. But if that happened less often and the sound cue was also a part of it, it might feel like it's part of the level still a little bit more than it currently does. Because while it's perfectly reasonable to have something like this, I think, visually, because it is mostly out of the way. I don't know if this stuff blocks nades. Doesn't appear like they have clipping brushes for grenades. I'll test it again when the next one comes in. But the fact that there's no... there's no clipping brush there. But the fact that there's no audio makes it sound really uncanny. Well, it doesn't sound anything like anything, but it feels very uncanny. So I would say that perhaps you could look into reducing the frequency of such things, but whenever those are there, I even think that that's an interesting gameplay stint to put the map in that particular category of things that set this map apart. You know, make it so that strategically placed areas have sound cues in those, you know, strategically placed events have sound cues in certain areas, and that does potentially interfere with audio readability, that you can discern the position of an enemy or the fact that there's an enemy there at all. Maybe that's deliberate. Maybe that's actually a calling card of the map in a way that allows terrorists or flankers of either team to reposition in a different kind of way. I think that would be an interesting take, and just one area where you could set this map further apart from the competition while tying it into this theme of, you know, car assembly. Anyway, continuing on, this is more verticality for you. You may be wondering where the bomb site is. Well, it's not up here. It's down here. Ow. And check this out. Not only is it down here, but the actual area for the bomb site for you to plant is rather small. You have to be more or less on this this little tarp here. So that's something to keep in mind. Like, obviously there's some pretty obvious bomb spots here that this would be something where you'd want to play post plant either from this position or maybe like even up here or something. So you could do that if you still had somebody on the T side, spawn side of things on the approach to A. And if you had somebody infiltrating from CT, you could do that. You could obviously smoke CT off. I don't really know what the meta CT positions would be here, just because there's so many angles to take, and the fact that there's a huge amount of verticality, and of course the fact that if you follow this little upper area and you go down and around, you will eventually be staring at CT spawn over there. It's Mark, dude. Who would have guessed? So given that you don't want to get destroyed by Mark, you might not feel comfortable going all the way over there. You might just smoke the bottom, hold the top, and have your buddy plant, something like that. But even then, there's more advantages, more angles to take. So this is where you would be coming out as a, your average Joe player, rolling down on the lower side. So say you drop down over here back in that angle, instead of going to that long corridor we were talking about earlier, you would come out this door. You have to make noise coming in, very reminiscent of Nuke in that particular respect, but obviously you could go the other way around if you wanted to. And secrecy isn't even necessarily as important because obviously Nuke is stacked on top of each other. So if you make sound on any bomb site, they can pretty much hear you wherever you are, assuming they're in the same area. I like the fact that there's this little thing that you can run across. I would even say that it's fine to even make this like a skill jump. But the fact that you can do it silently is also an interesting adaptation because I can just silently walk across here and I'm on top of this hut area. I assume people are going to be calling this hut because it's very similar to Nuke as well. It's another like Nuke vibe in general, even though the colors are kind of distinct in that respect. So this little hut entrance goes out to mid. We'll talk about that later on. And it's sort of constructed in somewhat of a similar fashion, even though it's like two rooms stacked on, laid out next to each other. But you can clearly see that you cut that off with a Molotov. You can throw it deeper to take care of, something a little bit further down. Make sure that they can't even get into position to potentially peek you or anything. I thought that it was possible. Oh, it looks like it is possible to self-boost up here. So forget what I said earlier about CTs requiring a boost. Every single time I tried that earlier, it didn't work. So maybe there's been an update or maybe I was just bad. But I'm not as bad anymore, clearly, because I was able to do it. That being said, this allows CTs to play on top of hut. If they wanted to cede a little bit of map control, what they could do is in a position where you have a rifle, on a gun round, I mean, obviously you could jump up back over here, and this would be a great fallback position as well. If you wanted to play the headshot angle, you could crouch behind here. I'm sure you're visible in some way, shape, or form. But if you wanted to do something like that, let me see if I can, I don't even remember my bind for bot crouch, so I'll just do it here. Yeah, so you are visible in a very mild sense. And again, this isn't like a perfect exact science or whatever, but I'm pretty sure you would be visible no matter what, especially if you were further back because you'd be up against the white background over there where both player models are visible in that particular respect because one is black and the other is blue. So it would be a pretty obvious case. But in this kind of position, you could then just play back over here, like on the very precipice of this little cliff, and you could moved Mark out of the way, and then you could, take some duels over here, and you would also be in a position, notably, this is where the entrance is for the upper part. So if you got like one CT over here, and then another CT all the way back up here, playing this angle, or playing behind this little cover over here, I mean, obviously there's like this little place that you can be tucked into as well. There's a lot of positions in post plant that doesn't open, or in other environments, just like holding it for the T's to aggress. You can do a lot with those positions. Now, again, I don't know about utility because the problem is we're dealing with a position where like you can't throw nades through this stuff, right? Like all those windows are not poppable, even though in theory this skybox could be completely open. Like none of those things would actually do anything. So if you were trying to throw an exec onto the site, I actually don't know what you would do. Like, I thought maybe there would be something over here, but this window just leads out to the main area over here. So what you could do is, I mean, obviously you could throw like some sort of flashbang that direction, and it would pop in anybody holding here. I think that's the right, yeah. So that obviously would pop anybody who's holding like back halls or whatever this would be called. And the problem is you're in a position where unfortunately, as unfortunate as it is to say, like I don't see what other options you can have. Like you have that pop flash that you can do. I imagine that would be relatively meta. You could do some sort of play around the ramp area or the little drop area over here. I guess you'd just call this red. So if you're on red and you're trying to enter in, right? Like say you have the door already open, you can obviously like throw a flash over here. You can do some sort of like similar to like Mirage. On the B side in the little apartment area, you can do a pop flash by throwing it above the stool, and it will pop in the middle of there. Maybe that would work. Like it would. I don't know if it would go as far as you'd need it to. So you might have to pop it off of like this, which thankfully is even in terms of its clip brush. So you could do something like that in theory, and they would hear the flash, but they wouldn't see it until. I guess they probably wouldn't even hear it until they were, like if they were all the way back, right? If they were trained over here, that could definitely work. Because that's a very limited amount of reaction time that you can have. And especially if there's any decals over there and they don't have our clear decals bound, it's probably unlikely that they'll even see it before they get flashed. So you could do something like that, right? There's some ways to flash yourself into advantageous positions. And once you get to the point where you have access to halls, I mean, then you can go a little bit more wild. I'm sure people will find some lineups. But it just seems odd that you can't throw nades through some of these windows. And I'm not really sure what to do about that because, like, you'd pretty much need to redesign a lot of the map, or you'd have to make it so that like parts of that bomb site are somehow accessible. Like, I don't think you can't even throw it because there's a window in the area. If this was open and you could like throw a flash through that, similar to Inferno Apartments on the A side, that could be somewhat interesting because then maybe you could even line up utility to like Molotov anybody who's like standing over here. And he's like holding from this position, you could like throw a Molotov around. The CTs could also use that as an opportunity to throw utility back at the Ts if they were trying to take halls. That would be one potential fix to that particular issue. That being said, it does seem like it's the main reason why I harp on utility usage is that because of the sheer number of angles on this bomb site, you have to be cognizant of the problems that poses for just relying on skill alone. You do need to be able to facilitate players to entry with utility rather than just being able to left click on people's heads, because you can't really rely on that if there's a million different positions for CTs to be. Now, I've only identified two really, really strong positions when it comes to holding from a more passive angle. And one of them is up above and the other one is down below. And that's fine. There's obviously like a couple of more default positions where you could be holding something like this, where it's very unlikely that you'd get hit from somebody going lower because of the angle difference, right? So you'd be able to hold something like this, especially with an op or something, you'd be able to scope up around here. You could then like flash out, or somebody could throw a smoke that would bloom right over here. And a little bit to the left, ideally. But, you know, so you do something like it'd be bloomed right over there, block out whole visibility, and you'd be able to reposition. Or maybe it would bloom over here and it would just block out, like leave a little gap for you or something like that. That could also work in theory. So there's a lot of different options you have. You can play around this pillar. You can play back here. This is kind of like a one and done angle if you get entryed. But until they drop, they can't see you from the lower part of the site. So there's that as well as an option. You could obviously play on the site itself. You could be playing down here, trained on this particular angle over here, and then swap over. It's just that you don't have a lot of cover after that. So I think there's only a handful of positions that you could even realistically expect players who are in the know about this map to be when they're trying to defend it from a CT position. And while there is a decent amount of options for aggression, I still have to wonder about whether or not, despite the fact that there's a limited number of positions, the lack of options for Ts to enter in here with utility will hurt the overall experience of trying to take this bomb site. Because we also have to remember that the bomb sites themselves should facilitate the approach of not just Ts who are taking the bomb site, but CTs who are trying to retake as well. And while this initially sounds like a CT-sided issue, if the Ts do successfully take it, the CTs themselves may also be out of options. Sometimes that's seemingly by design, or at least accepted as a fine element of the map, which would be like Dust 2 B site. But in this particular case, I feel like the reasons for it are more incidental than deliberate. And this is, of course, pure speculation. But I would say that if you wanted to add a little bit more versatility to allow other styles of play to find success on a map like this, opening up the bomb site to allow for more utility and to facilitate different kinds of approaches would be useful. Now, I haven't talked about Ts entering from hut onto this particular bomb site because I actually believe that this will mostly be a rotation used by CTs due to the state of middle, unless they've already lost mid control, and at which point they're already looking in roughly the direction of where the Ts would come from hut. Now, if hut opened up here, or if hut opened up like facing a different angle than it currently does, like back here or something, I don't know how healthy that would be for the game. I'm not even necessarily suggesting that as a change, but I do think that would change the dynamic because all of a sudden you have to be worried about a different angle. The only time you really have to check where you're actually aiming and consider a backstab is if they go all the way through the back of mid into CT spawn, where we found Mark over here earlier. Then you can worry about a backstab potentially. But by that point, if you've lost that much map control, the round, you've probably got bigger problems, I would say. So while it is something that could potentially come into play and add a little bit of a different dimension to this particular bomb site in terms of how dynamic it can be, it's something that would happen relatively infrequently, whereas the hut take, okay, maybe T's will be using that relatively frequently, or at least more frequently than a backstab, but it ultimately results in a relatively similar approach. They have a little bit more cover coming into the site, but afterwards there is a pretty big gap, right? Just more or less the same as when you come out of red and you're trying to drop down to maybe take a fight from behind here. Like this could even be, an allegory to this could be the under palace position, the dark position on Mirage on A site, because it's kind of a similar position where you can watch hut, you can kill people who are dropping, they have to drop down, except it's even, in a way, it's kind of worse for the people who are coming out, because I don't know what kind of lineup you might need. Now, this might actually be wrong. I might be able to find a lineup here by like run stepping or something like that, but I'm not sure what the lineup would be. Like if you clear this angle and like you throw this, maybe, but I don't think it spreads. Like you're gonna have to find some lineup for that sort of thing if you wanted to flush out any player's position down here. You could throw smokes to isolate the hut part of the site entirely. Like you could throw a smoke like over here, and that might allow your hut player to find an entry. Like maybe they take this opportunity to jump out, and first they would check like up here like a nuke, and otherwise they would like jump over here and look for an angle on any player who might be under. That might be some way that you as a T can use utility to assist your team. Where there's a will, there's a way, and I'm sure some people will find some stuff. But despite that fact, it still feels like your options are relatively limited, and that weirdly enough, T's might, the meta for this map might evolve to the point where T's are saving most of their utility for post plants and only using whatever minimum utility they need to get into a position so that they can use like it's going to take a lot of utility as from a CT perspective or from a defensive perspective to actually hold this area, thinking about all the areas that you can smoke, but how frequently you would have to do that. That would be something that I would positionally imagine would potentially happen in this particular area. So enough about A. CT spawn is quite scenic. We saw that Mark was over here. You can take this very long staircase over here. And again, kind of similar, though not as bad, I would say, in terms of the issue that we observed in T-spawn is that it's a very open spawn. There's a bit more cover here, and there's also a quicker rotation to the spots that matter. But I do find it interesting that both of the spawns are relatively open, and both of the spawns are also very far away from each other. I guess that's more of a T-spawn thing in this particular map. Though we are seeing, based on the minimap, T-spawn is a little bit closer to the B-bomb site, which I will be showing very shortly. But I do want to cut into mid here. So when you're coming into the B or mid little split path here from CT, you can either go up to mid or down to B. And I actually think mid is really interesting because of the different options that are available to both teams. Now you can come in here, like every other map that has a mid, and jump over here and post up as an op. Like this is like Mirage window or whatever, right? But the drop is a little bit further down. There's not really a whole lot of cover back here, but you could also hold this angle or something behind the car. And again, you know, if you want to smoke this off or something to cover the lower position from a ladder room that I'll show off in a bit, that would obviously be potentially helpful. If you want to boost yourself up here, you can smash this window that's here normally. Obviously, that requires sound. So if you want to silently enter this back area to backstab, you would need a boost, basically. And I mean, that's fine. That is what it is, right? But considering the fact that these all of these different angles that you have, like that's the other side of the A hut, I think it's interesting that there's just quite so much... I'm taken aback by the amount of verticality, once again. I think it's really cool. So if we jump back to the T version of mid, because I got a little bit more to show before we talk about that ladder room that I was talking about. This is the lower entrance to mid. You could take the lower entrance to A if you went hard left. If you took a soft left, you would be going into the ladder room. which lets you look straight ahead towards A. I really like the symmetry of this particular area. Obviously, the doors are not symmetrical in size, but the fact that you come out and you're facing a dead shot angle where somebody from the A bomb site could potentially rotate from CT side to assist in a mid duel. And the fact that T's could, in theory, pivot into A if they wanted to. I think that's really cool. It's another layer to the map that sets it apart like many other cases. I guess it would be most closely allegorized to something like the Mirage connector that goes into A, where you can immediately go from like underpass to A, or from mid to A through connector. It's just that it's not clearly indicated in the same way. Like, this is just a straight shot, which is kind of cool. This is that upper platform that adds that verticality element that I was talking so much about earlier. And we're dealing with a very quick rotation. There's a nice little gap over here that lets you throw flashes and whatnot. And you can take flashes and take fights. And again, this is sort of like a straight shot lineup in theory. So it makes it very obvious where some of the op duels are. I don't mind the map being super straightforward with op duels and positions like that. I think sometimes it's nice to have something that's a little bit familiar, especially since this map takes many liberties with what most people would consider the default assumptions that they have with regards to Counter-Strike level design. So I think that's really nice. It's like a nice little small touch that's like, hey, I'm inviting you over. You know what this is. And only later do you show them all of the crazy shit in your basement. So there you go. That's the walk-in clinic there. There's a couple of different ways that you can gain access to a B rotation. This B hall area lets you go into it from the lower side. If you also go from the upper platform, you can do that here too. But it's a straight situation. I would think that this would open because there's a nice big arrow telling me, and I thought for a second that it would link up with a door over here. I was very obviously wrong, and I thought I found something very exciting, but I was wrong. So I don't know if maybe you want to not have it be green and very inviting, because that's what it looks like to me. Maybe just have it like boarded up or something. Could be interesting. Like, this is a little bit darker, so it sends the signal that I can't interact with that. That one, on the other hand, maybe a little bit more queuing might be nice. That being said, this is the entrance to the B-bomb site from mid. I will show the entrance to the B-bomb site from CT, and then we'll talk about the B-bomb site entrance from T. There's two of them. So there's this really long rotation I'm not a supreme fan of, because even though I'm saying this is very long, it's really not that long in theory, but because of the, like, you know, you can't break these glasses, you can't, like, I guess you can self-boost it with 3 jumps to get up here from there, but at that point you might as well just walk across. It's not going to save you that much time. I just feel like there's not a whole lot of interconnectivity between this area and like it's pretty much just a straight shot, even though it's a curve. So if you follow my logic here, maybe that door might actually be somewhat interesting, because it would be another way for you to backstab into the backside of the CTs if you wanted to. I don't think it's necessary per se, but it's just something to think about. One thing that, again, I should highlight is the fact that there's a lot of care put into making sure that areas of this map don't feel very monotonous, despite the fact that a lot of the same materials are being used. We talked about the patterns of the floor on the A side approach for T's earlier. I think much the same thing is happening over here. And again, we have this mat serving as the anchor point for the bomb site. Once again, a relatively small area. It's a little bit bigger, I think, in terms of just size than the A-bomb site. But I think it's interesting that the actual plant area is smaller than you might initially think. And this initially I was thrown off because I thought I could plant anywhere over here, but it's actually here. I don't know if maybe a higher resolution texture is available for something like this, or just something that looks a little bit more standouty, but something to make this stand out a little bit more might be appreciated. Before I talk a little bit more about the bomb site itself, I should show the approaches, and then we can talk about the bomb site itself and finish our journey together. So, this is the most controversial area of the map as far as I have seen, and there may be plans to adjust this. Again, this is not going to be the final version of the map. I'm sure there will be some changes. I would assume anyway. But this vent here is very controversial because of the fact that it's so easy to run through. You bust it open, and now you're in the site. The rotation overall is longer than you might think for being considered a rush spot, right? It's starting at 48 is when I held W. And we're going to go all the way over there and track how long it takes us to get onto the site. So it's already been 8 seconds. I botched my jump, so We'll say I got there at 37 instead of 36 because of the jump botch. But yeah, that's 11 seconds as far as a rotation goes. Probably not that far off from the CT rotation. The question is, are you prepared for like 5 terrorists to fall out of here? And I would say it's probably okay if that happens because they're literally lining up and dropping for you. They're not going to be able to retaliate until their legs touch the ground. So the other rotation is a bit more straightforward and also has that little bit of sense that maybe there's just not a whole lot here that interconnects. But the other thing to consider is that, of course, it does appear that you can, if you can throw the nades successfully, you can do so in a way that contributes positively to a B rush, perhaps. So if coupled with this nade that I just threw, you see a bunch of people falling out here, yeah, you might be destroyed then. But aside from being a dedicated utility man, I'm not really sure what you would be doing in that position. And it takes a long time for you to get down here to flank. It seems more like potentially a location for a CT to try to retake from, more than a position that T's would be able to find a lot of success taking the site from itself. And that's where I think the problem is that this is such a straightforward position. And while you do get utility access, I imagine there's not too much that you gain. Maybe you would send one guy there, but even then, do you can commit him to that position, or does he just throw his nades and then run back to the vent because it's pretty close by? So you're not even really making him commit to taking this other position, even if he goes there to throw nades. So I think at that point, that's probably one of the major issues with the map if you were talking in a game balance perspective. This is obviously a bit more of a straightforward bomb site, all things considered, even though you can jump up on all of these boxes, which I like, adds that layer of verticality that's a little bit more familiar to most people from playing other maps that have props that you can jump on and stuff. It's not quite as extreme as the A bomb site, which is clearly the more interesting one in terms of what it brings to the table in a unique sense. And for that, I think it's quite interesting. But the B bomb site is a bit more familiar. And it does some things that are more interesting, like the fact that you could be positioned in any area in this particular room while you wait for the CTs to try to retake, or you could even position yourself in there in a way that allows you to remain alive potentially for a long time as a CT if they haven't spotted you and they haven't cleared you, or things are smoked or whatever. You can throw a wrench into their plans, a spanner in the works. And that could certainly be quite interesting, I think. So there's a lot of potential in this bomb site for interesting play, which I like. Gunfights, I'm not sure about those, just because the cover is rather sparse on this side of the bomb site. But that just means that you are mostly looking at straight shots from people who are elevating themselves slightly with this workbench. They can do this. They can strafe like this. It does open them up to potentially being attacked by somebody from vent. So I would suggest that if you're going to take this, you're going to try to hold this site, you probably wouldn't want to do it passively. You'd probably want to do it with people on the site. And as a result, maybe the reason why people are finding it difficult to withstand B rushes is simply because the bomb site itself requires a little bit of forethought into how you actually position yourself on the site and how you handle retakes and such. Once again, I'm pretty sure you can't pierce the shroud over here, so unfortunately you're going to be stuck not being able to rain utility in besides the developer approved methods of over here, which I'm a little bit miffed about, but maybe that'll change in an update, or maybe it'll end up being more of an aim map in that sense. I still think there's a lot of tactical depth that you can do just through sheer rotations and more localized utility usage rather than utilizing skyboxes in ways that other maps have done. And in a way, that whole backhaul area on the B-bomb site kind of reminds me of Inferno B site, where you can stay back behind new box and stuff like that for a while, except it's a little bit more obvious that oh, somebody could be there, and there's more real estate for you to take fights from, which I like. I just think, again, there's a lot of room for even further exponential growth of the tactical options that players have in terms of the decisions that they can take, right? And that will only really come if utility is enabled in more places. So that would more or less be what I'm after. Can't even break those windows. Man, these people invested in windows. Holy moly. Every single one. That being said, hopefully my analysis was interesting enough and insightful enough to provoke some thoughts for the map makers that watch the channel. I, of course, appreciate any follow-up that the author of this map or any mappers themselves or enthusiasts themselves want to provide. And I think that this map would be really interesting to see, maybe after a little bit of cleanup here and there, a little bit of updates here and there. There's some graphical bugs I didn't really talk about, like, issues with shadows and stuff that might be native to the source engine, but surely could be worked around in some capacity. So I expect a little bit more polish eventually, assuming catfood still wants to work on this map. But it's already quite good in terms of how clean it ends up looking. It's a little bit more cluttered than it could be in theory, but I understand the idea that you want to rope as many people in as possible. And as a result of that, I'm not so upset about that. And on top of it, I think it's a really interesting layout. And assuming more utility options come in the future, either through some of the suggestions I've had or any of the ideas that the mappers themselves end up providing or coming up with on their own accord, I think it'll be really neat to see what this map has to offer in the future. And once again, catfood has put together a map that's very interesting. And certainly, I would say, highly polished enough to immediately compete for a spot with what's in the scrimmage map pool and stuff like that. So that has been my analysis of Engage. Make it so.